when you think of some of the greatest things to ever happen on a basketball court, both Kobe Bryant's 81-point and Wilt's 100-point games come to mind. With Kobe's diverse array of shots from around the court compared to Wilt's plethora of shots inside the paint, the way each player achieved their milestone couldn't have been any different. So the question is, who really had the more impressive game, Kobe or Wilt? Before we jump into the comparison, let's look at a little bit of the history of these two games. Kobe's 81-point game came on January 22nd, 2006. And during that year, Kobe was shooting 35.4 points per game on 45, 35, 85 shooting splits, with averages about 5 rebounds and 4.5 assists. Meanwhile, Wilt's 100-point game happened on March 2nd, 1962. Hold on to your boots because you're about to hear some crazy averages. Wilt was averaging 50.4 points per game with a field goal percentage of 50%. He was also averaging 25 rebounds with 2.4 assists. You understand how ridiculous those numbers are. I think it should be noted that if Wilt had won more championships, it's very possible that he'd be the undisputed GOAT, and it wouldn't even be close with averages like these.
You had to have Wilt against Michael. My prime and his prime. How much money would you be willing to bet?
The first and most obvious aspect of this debate you want to look at is going to be the era that each of these games occurred in. We'll start with Wilt's 100-point game. Wilt scored his 100 points back in 1962, and the game in that era was completely different than it was today. The most obvious and glaring difference being there's no three-point line. And even though you would think the three-point line would be the biggest difference in how these games happened, the reality is the biggest difference wasn't that there was a three-point line at one point, but it was the fact that in 1962, an NBA team had about 125 possessions per game, compared to Kobe's era where it was about 90 to 95. That's 25 more possessions a game. And as you can see here, look at the final score differences in each of these games. Wilt's Philadelphia Warriors beat the New York Knicks 169 to 147. And for those of you who think scoring is out of control these days, that'll really make you scratch your head. And as you can see here in Kobe's 81-point game, the Lakers beat the Raptors 122 to 104. That's about 80 more points that was scored in Wilt's game as compared to Kobe's. So what we can take from this is that Wilt's 100 points is only 19 points more than Kobe's. Kobe's team only added 40 additional points to his 81. Meanwhile, the Warriors added about another 70 points to their total. The next step in going down the trajectory of era would be looking at their size and height of each era, the type of player Kobe and Wilt were both going against. And while this is going to surprise a lot of you, the average height in 1962 and 2007 is about 6'6". Basketball has always been a tall man's game. Don't tell this guy that though. Drink your water. But when it comes to weight, there's a massive difference in between the two. There's about a 22-pound difference in the average weight back in 1962 as compared to 2007, which means the players in 2007 are a lot stronger than they were back in 1962. And that should come to nobody's surprise. As physical sciences have progressed, we've seen both the physique and the abilities of athletes increase with it. And with Kobe Bryant being about 6'6" himself, about 220 pounds, right on the average of the NBA, compared to Wilt Chamberlain being 7'1", nearly 300 pounds, there really is a massive difference when it comes to the abilities of the people they were playing against, the defenders they were up against. And this is where you couple in the defensive schemes, the abilities of what the teams were able to even do on defense. Back in Wilt's time, there was no such thing as double teaming. There was no zone defenses. And while many will argue Kobe Bryant didn't see double teams till late into the game, they did try zone defense. They did try switching different players onto him. And unfortunately for Jalen Rose, he ended up being the primary defender that night, and it was one of the worst days of his career.
I watched the whole game. I seen the whole game. I was at home watching the game. Before the game even started, when I seen, I said he was probably gonna score 70 tonight.
You lying?
Yeah, boy.
Almost every one of my channel's viewers is not subscribed to the channel. Do me a huge favor and hit that subscription button. We're trying to get monetized. My dog and I. When you look at these different shots that Kobe's taking, the way he's getting his points, it's absolutely remarkable. You're witnessing the greatest offensive tool in NBA history. This game truly showcased that Kobe was so well trained, so studied, so prepared, and so in shape that he could do literally anything he wanted to at any time on that basketball court. And to further add how much Wilt's dominance really impacted his ability to score at ease, you have to look at the difference in free throws that they shot. Look how many free throw shot Wilt took as opposed to Kobe. Most, if not all of Wilt's shots came in the paint or at the free throw line. And if you look at the footage of Kobe's game, you might see the best all-around offensive performance of all time. Because the reality of what he was able to do from the dunks, the layups, the mid-range, the three-point shots, it was truly historical. There really is no other player in history that has had as deep of a bag as Kobe Bryant did on offense. And Kobe had already scored 50 points in at least 4 games that season, including a 60-point performance in 3 quarters, in which he famously said, "Nah, I'll get it next time," when the coach asked him if he wanted to go back in for the 4th quarter. Which brings us to the context of this game. Now, if you know Kobe's career, there's a reason why he had to score so many points like this. This was arguably the worst team he had ever been on. Memes like this are infamous for the horrible teammates that Kobe had to play with during this period. Meanwhile, Wilt Chamberlain had a much more balanced team that was contending for the championship. And in the context of the specific game, the Warriors were ahead the entire game. It really wasn't up until the second half the Warriors realized what Wilt could do and they started feeding him the ball as much as possible. But when it comes to Kobe's game, they were losing to the Raptors by 18 points at one point in the second half. Every one of Kobe's points is considered a pressure situation because of how much they're down by. And there are many reports that the Warriors were intentionally fouling just to put the ball back into Wilt's hands so he could hit 100 points. The reality is each of these scoring outbursts was a great representation of their teams at the time. The Warriors were a great team that were able to assist their man Wilt in achieving 100 points. And the Lakers were such a terrible bottom-feeding team that they had no choice but just to rely on Kobe to do absolutely everything. When it comes to comparing eras, there's really no doubt here. Kobe Bryant absolutely played in the tougher era.
I heard he had 81. I'm like, man, that's unbelievable. 81 this day and age, that's unbelievable.
Everything Kobe had to do came against tougher opponents, tougher teams, tougher schemes. And he did all that while being the average size of the NBA player. While on the other hand, when it comes to the context of how these games happen, this goes Kobe's way as well. With the game already being out of hand and becoming a team effort to get Wilt's 100, compared to what Kobe had to do and the way he had to do it to get to his 81, and it being necessary for them to win the game as well, there's no doubt the context of Kobe's 81-point game is much more impressive. Wilt, you just took too many free throws for my liking. And then of course, there's deep diving into how they actually obtained those points. In Wilt's 100-point game, he shot 36 for 63, which is about 57% from the field. But then you see he scored 28 out of 32 free throw attempts, which was actually insane for Wilt at the time. He was a 50% free throw shooter. And if you thought Wilt's 57% from the field was efficient, Kobe's was even more efficient, shooting 28 for 46 at 61% from the field, which included 7 for 13 from the three-point line. Kobe shot 54% from three, and only making 18 free throws out of 20 shows that the way Kobe achieved his 81-point game was much more complex, much more difficult, much more nuanced than Wilt's 100. It took Wilt 20 more shots and 12 free throws just to score 19 more points in a game where there was 80 total more points scored than Kobe's. Kobe really isn't known for his efficiency, and if you know the context of that, you don't need explaining, but for many that look at history, they don't think he's that efficient. That's a story for another time. Let's just drink your water. In 1962, the average team scored about 115 points per game, compared to in 2007, where the average was about 100 points on the dot. Kobe's 81-point game came during arguably the greatest defensive time in NBA history. Kobe played in a time where we saw the 04 Pistons or the 08 Celtics, which he even defeated in a 7-game series in the finals. This is also why when you look at Kobe's stats as opposed to maybe LeBron or Michael, both Michael and LeBron especially, played in times where there was more scoring than there was during Kobe's time. The entire teams are scoring almost 20 points a game less, you're obviously going to have lower scoring averages across the board. But Kobe's outrageous scoring burst after game after game after game during this period all came at the peak of defense in the NBA. And that's why when you compare the two games, what Kobe achieved was so much more impressive than what Wilt was able to do back in 1962. Wilt benefited from a league that was literally designed for someone like him to succeed. Meanwhile, Kobe was doing what he did in a league that was designed to stop people like him. And if we're being really picky, we've never even seen footage of the 100-point game, so we're not even sure if it really happened. And with everything we've heard about how his team kept fouling the other team and kept trying to help him get these points, it almost makes you wonder how much of this really just happened so the NBA could just say it happened and get free marketing. And at the end of the day, we'll always have those moments and that statue in front of Staples Center that will forever remind us of the greatest scoring game in the history of the NBA. Rest in peace to Kobe Bryant, one of the greatest, if not the greatest, NBA player of all time. As always, hit that sub button and turn on notifications. Go out there and do something great.